Hello, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Rain poured down like a gray curtain, enveloping the narrow, dark alley tucked away behind the city's dazzling skyscrapers. The sound of rushing water mingled with the distant roar of car engines, but in this corner of the alley, everything seemed to sink into a deadly silence, until a sharp gunshot rang out, tearing through the night. Peter Blackwood, the man who always appeared in perfect black suits with a cold, arrogant gaze, now collapsed onto the wet ground, blood from the wound in his chest spreading out, staining his pristine white shirt red. His arms still clung tightly to Anna Carter, as if using his last ounce of strength to shield her from the invisible blade of fate. Anna screamed, her voice breaking in panic, drowned out by the relentless rain. "Peter, no, you can't die. Wake up!" She knelt beside him, her knees slamming into the dirty puddle, but she paid no heed to it. Her trembling hands cradled his pale face, her cold fingers threading through his jet-black hair, now matted with rain and blood. His eyes were half closed, his long lashes trembling faintly, as if he were struggling to hold on to the last shred of consciousness to see her one final time. Blood from his chest soaked through her white dress, leaving horrifying red streaks. But Anna didn't take her eyes off him. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the icy raindrops, falling onto his face like a hopeless plea. "Peter, please, wake up," she whispered, her voice so choked it was barely audible. A few steps away, three figures in black stood silently under the dim streetlight, guns still gripped tightly in their hands. One of them, the tallest with a scar running down his left cheek, curled his lips into a faint smirk, his deep voice echoing like it came from hell. "It's done. Let's go." The men in black turned and walked into the darkness, the sound of their boots splashing through puddles fading into the distance, leaving Anna and Peter in the ceaseless rain. She didn't look after them, didn't care about the figures vanishing like ghosts. All she could see was Peter, the man she had once hated, had fled from hundreds of times, now lying motionless before her, blood pouring from his wound as if it threatened to take his entire life with it. Anna leaned down, pressing her forehead against his, her shaky breaths mingling with his faint ones. "Why did you do it?" she whispered, her voice breaking in agony. "Why do you always protect me?" Those questions weren't new to her, but this time, they weighed heavier than ever. She recalled the times he'd appeared just as danger struck, pulling her back from the brink of life and death, even though she'd never wanted to admit it. Now, as he lay here amid the freezing rain and endless darkness, she felt her heart being crushed. "Don't leave me," she sobbed, her hands clutching his shirt tightly, as if she could hold him back with her feeble strength. The sound of an ambulance siren wailed in the distance, cutting through the rain, but to Anna it seemed to come too late. She looked up, her red-rimmed eyes scanning the empty alley where only she and Peter remained. Memories flashed through her mind like a fast-forwarded film. The first time she met him at a fashion event, his arrogant gaze irritating her. The times she'd sneaked away from his mansion, only to be found soon after. And that night he took a knife for her, blood gushing but his eyes still resolute. She had run from him, had despised him, so why now as he lay here, did it feel like her entire world was collapsing? "Peter, you can't leave me," she screamed again, her voice lost in the rain. She held him tightly, heedless of the blood soaking her dress, heedless of the bone-chilling cold enveloping her. Tears fell onto his face as if they could call him back from the edge of death. But he didn't move, only the faint breath escaping his pale lips, a fragile thread tying him to life. Anna pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the slow heartbeat beneath his torn shirt, and for the first time she prayed for him to live, prayed for a chance to tell him the things she'd never dared admit. The ambulance lights flashed from the end of the alley, the siren growing nearer. Medics rushed out, shouting something Anna couldn't hear. They pulled her away from Peter, but she struggled, hands still clinging to him. "Don't take him. I have to stay with him." A nurse gripped her shoulder, voice firm. "You have to let us work." Finally she let go, collapsing into the puddle, her tear-filled eyes watching as Peter was lifted onto a stretcher and carried into the ambulance. The siren faded, leaving her alone in the cold alley, her heart shattered. She hugged herself, rain soaking through every layer of fabric, but the chill on her skin was nothing compared to the agony tearing her apart. How did we end up like this? She asked herself, her voice trembling in her mind. She recalled the early days when she fled him, when she saw him as an enemy. So why now, with him teetering between life and death, did she cry as if losing the most important person in her life? Those questions hung in her mind, unanswered, filled only with pain and regret. 3 months earlier, Chapter 1. James's secret, Anna threatened. Anna Carter, 28 years old, is a talented fashion designer who has spent her youth turning dreams into reality with every stitch and thread. Her small office is located on the third floor of an old building in the heart of the city, where the faint yellow light of a desk lamp illuminates scattered sketches and stunning dresses hanging on racks like living works of art. With eyes bright with passion and skillful hands, Anna has built a peaceful life she cherishes, waking each morning with a cup of black coffee, sketching new ideas, and dreaming of a day when her name would echo far and wide. But all that peace shattered on a fateful night when she unwittingly stumbled into a secret that didn't belong to her, a secret powerful enough to drag her into an abyss. It was a late evening after a fashion show where Anna had participated as a guest designer. The backstage was still bustling with the laughter of models, the hum of hair dryers, and the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air. Anna sat alone in a corner of the dressing room, exhausted after a long day, her phone in hand as she checked messages. She switched on the recording mode, a small habit to capture sudden ideas, when two low voices sounded from behind a curtain a few meters away. "We need to deal with that old man before the end of the month," a cold voice said. "He knows too much. If we don't eliminate him, the whole network will collapse." The other voice chuckled. "Don't worry, James has it arranged. The dirty money will be cleaned through the new charity fund. No one will suspect a thing." Anna froze, her hand trembling on the phone. She didn't want to hear more, but those words had already etched themselves into her mind like a curse. James Langston, that name was no stranger. He was a renowned financial tycoon, always appearing in magazines with a refined smile, impeccably tailored suits, and grandiose speeches about charity. But now Anna knew the truth behind that facade. James ran a massive money laundering network, ready to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. She turned off her phone, her heart pounding, trying to convince herself she could forget what she'd heard. But as she left the backstage, James's sharp, cold gaze met hers from a distance, as if he could sense the panic within her. Anna hurried away, her high heels clacking on the wooden floor, but an unshakable unease clung to her like a shadow. The next day, things began to turn grim. As Anna left her office at dusk, she noticed a black car parked a few meters away, its tinted windows concealing the interior. She thought it was a coincidence, but the car reappeared the following night, and the night after that, always parked silently in front of her house like an unspoken warning. She checked her phone, and true fear struck when she played the recording. Those voices were still there, clear and chilling, like a death sentence hanging over her head. She wanted to delete it immediately, but her trembling hand hesitated, as if keeping it was her only way to protect herself. She didn't know that James had already detected the existence of that recording. Her fear escalated quickly. Her phone started receiving silent calls. Only steady breathing came from the other end, as if someone were monitoring her every moment. One morning, as she opened the door to get the newspaper, a white envelope slipped out from the crack. Inside was a photo of her taken from afar, standing in front of her office, with scrawled words, "You can't escape." Anna threw the envelope to the floor, clutching her chest, her breathing rapid. She drew the curtains, locked the door, but fear still seeped through every crevice, suffocating her every second. She knew James was playing a game of cat and mouse, and she was the prey with no way out. The nightmare reached its peak on a stormy night. Anna was sitting in her office trying to focus on a new sketch to distract herself from the tension, when the lights suddenly went out. The sound of rain pounding against the windows was the only noise left, until a tall figure appeared at the door. James stepped in, his long black coat dripping wet, his eyes glinting in the darkness like a predator's. He shut the door, advancing toward her, each step a dull thud on the wooden floor. "What did you hear, Anna?" he asked, his voice low but sharp as a knife. Anna backed away, her back hitting the desk, her hand gripping a pen like a useless weapon. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, trying to stay calm. James smirked wickedly, leaning forward and planting his hands on the desk, trapping her in the tight space between him and the scattered sketches. "Don't pretend," he whispered, his hot breath brushing her ear. "I know you heard everything backstage. Give me that recording now." Anna trembled, her hands secretly slipping the phone from her pocket. She knew handing it over would strip her of her only leverage, but refusing could mean death right here. With shaking hands, she unlocked the phone, found the recording, and deleted it before James's cold eyes. "I don't have it," she said, her voice choked. "See? I've deleted it." The screen displayed "deleted," and she held it up for him to see, hoping it would make him leave. But James didn't budge. He stared at her, his gaze darkening, his smile twisting into a dangerous curve. "You think deleting it is enough?" he asked, his voice so low it sent chills down her spine. "I don't care about the recording. I care about what's in your head. You heard it, and I can't let you walk free with a mind full of secrets." He straightened up, adjusting his coat, but the menace in his tone didn't waver. "From now on, you'll do as I say. Every step, every decision of yours will be under my control. If you obey, I'll give you the world, money, fame, everything. But if you dare breathe a word to anyone—" He paused, his eyes cutting like a blade. "I'll take everything from you, your family, your career, your life." Anna felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt nailed to the floor. James turned, heading for the door, leaving one final sentence before vanishing into the rain. "You have 3 days to think it over. Don't disappoint me." The door slammed shut, leaving Anna alone in the dark. She sank into the chair, clutching her chest, her breathing ragged as if she were suffocating. Deleting the recording hadn't saved her. It had only plunged her deeper into James's trap. He didn't need evidence. He needed her absolute silence, and he wouldn't stop until she was completely his. In her panic, a name flashed in her mind. Peter Blackwood, the man she'd once rejected, the only one with enough power to confront James. She hated him, hated his arrogance, but now he was her only glimmer of hope. Anna stood up, wiped her tears, and whispered to herself, "I have no other choice." Chapter 2. An Unwanted Savior. Peter. Peter Blackwood, 32 years old, is a name that resonates in the financial world as a symbol of power and coldness. He heads Blackwood Enterprises, the city's largest financial conglomerate, with gleaming glass towers rising high in the urban center, where he sits in a spacious office on the top floor, looking down on the world like a king on his throne. Peter always appears in perfectly tailored black suits, his jet black hair neatly combed back, and his deep eyes gleaming with an arrogance no one dares to challenge. He is not only rich in wealth, but also in ambition, a man who believes everything in this world can be bought, even people's hearts. But one person made him stumble in that belief: Anna Carter. They first met at a fashion event nearly a year ago. Anna, wearing a turquoise evening gown she had designed herself, stood out in the crowd like a shining star. Not because of her beauty, but because of the confidence and strong personality radiating from her every gesture. Peter, accustomed to women flocking around him, was immediately captivated. He approached her, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand, and said in a deep, confident voice, "Someone like you should be with me. I can give you everything. Fame, money, the whole world if you want it." But Anna didn't waver. She looked up, her bright eyes flashing with a sharp gaze, and replied with a cold smile, "I don't need anyone to hand me my life, Mr. Blackwood. Thanks for the offer, but I decline." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Peter standing there, feeling rejected for the first time in his life. And also, for the first time, his heart stirred with a strange beat. Since then, Peter couldn't forget her. He followed her from afar, through articles about her designs, through whispers in high society, but he never approached her again. His pride wouldn't allow him to bow to a woman who had turned him down. Yet deep inside Anna's image, with her softly curling hair falling over her shoulders and her unyielding gaze, had carved itself into his mind like a scar that would never fade. He told himself it was just fleeting curiosity, but every time he thought of her, he felt something he couldn't name. To Anna, Peter was just a vague memory, a haughty man she wanted no part of. Her life went on with sketches and dreams until James Langston stepped in and turned it into a nightmare. After that fateful rainy night, when James threatened to take everything from her if she didn't obey him, Anna fell into an unprecedented panic. She couldn't sleep, couldn't work. Every small noise in her apartment made her jump. She knew she couldn't face James alone. He was too powerful, too ruthless, with henchmen ready to erase her in an instant. But she also couldn't surrender, couldn't let him control her life. In her desperation, a name flashed in her mind: Peter Blackwood. She hated the idea, hated having to beg the man she'd once flatly rejected, the man she saw as the embodiment of arrogance and coldness. But she had no other choice. Only Peter, with his wealth, influence, and vast network, could stand against James and shield her from the death lurking nearby. That night, as the rain continued to fall relentlessly, Anna stood before the Blackwood Enterprises tower, her hands trembling in her thin, soaked coat. She took a deep breath, stepped through the revolving glass doors, and headed straight to the top floor, where she knew Peter would be. The staff had all gone home, leaving only the dim glow from his office spilling into the endless hallway. When she pushed the door open, Peter was sitting behind a large ebony desk, flipping through documents, his focus so intense he didn't notice her at first. He wore a white shirt with sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms, and his black suit jacket hung loosely over the chair. When he looked up and saw Anna standing there, her eyes red, her wet hair clinging to her face, her dress crumpled, he froze, his brows furrowing in rare surprise. "Anna Carter?" he asked, his deep voice resounding in the quiet space. Anna stepped forward, her high heels clicking softly on the marble floor, and stopped in front of his desk. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need your help. James Langston, he wants to kill me." Peter raised an eyebrow, his sharp, cold gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, as if assessing whether she was serious or playing a game. He set the papers down, leaned back in his chair, and crossed his hands over his chest. "James Langston?" he repeated, his tone even but tinged with curiosity. "And why should I help you?" Anna bit her lip, her hands clenching so tightly her nails dug into her palms. "Because you're the only one who can stand up to him," she replied, her voice catching. "He knows I overheard his secret. He threatened to take everything from me, my family, my career, my life. If I don't do what he says, I have no one else to turn to." A brief silence blanketed the room, broken only by the rain tapping against the glass behind Peter. He looked at her, his gaze no longer just cold, but mixed with something deeper, amusement perhaps, or a hint of satisfaction at seeing her, the one who'd rejected him, now standing here begging him. He stood up, tall and imposing, stepping out from behind the desk and closing the distance between them. Anna instinctively stepped back, but he stopped a few paces away, close enough for her to catch the faint scent of his woody cologne. "You rejected me last time," he said, his voice low and deliberate, as if savoring each word. "Now you're here begging me? How interesting." Anna swallowed hard, her red-rimmed eyes flashing with a mix of desperation and lingering pride. "I don't want to be here," she replied, her voice trembling but firm. "But I have no choice. Laugh at me if you want, go ahead. But if you don't help me, I'll die." Peter fell silent, his eyes locked on hers, as if reading every thought in her mind. Then he returned to his desk, sat down and tapped lightly on the wooden surface. "I'll help you," he said, his tone calm but commanding. Anna exhaled in relief, but before she could thank him, he looked up, his eyes darkening. "But there's a condition." She froze, her heart pounding. "What condition?" she asked, her voice faltering with a bad premonition. Peter smiled, a faint, cold smile brimming with meaning. He leaned forward, his deep voice ringing out like a verdict. "Marry me. Only if you're my wife will I have a legitimate reason to protect you from James." Anna stood stunned, her eyes widening in disbelief at what she just heard. But Peter's gaze made it clear he wasn't joking, and she knew from this moment on, her life would never be the same. Welcome to Soul Stories. Thanks for following our stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on meaningful stories. Chapter 3. The Marriage Contract, a Gilded Prison. The spacious office of Peter Blackwood fell silent after his final words. The dim glow from the crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling cast light on his sharp, cold face, highlighting the deep eyes locked onto Anna. "Marry me," he said, his low voice resonating like an irresistible command. "Only if you're my wife will I have a legitimate reason to protect you from James." Anna stood there, her feet as if frozen to the marble floor, her breath quickening in her chest. His proposal echoed in her mind, each word like a knife slicing through the last layer of pride she struggled to hold on to. Marrying Peter, the man she had once rejected, the man she viewed as the embodiment of arrogance and coldness, was the last thing she wanted in the world. But James's gaze, his threatening voice, and the dark shadow of death lurking nearby left her with no way out. Anna bit her lip, her hands clenching so tightly that her nails dug deep into her palms, leaving faint red marks. She looked straight at Peter, her red-rimmed eyes reflecting a mix of desperation and helplessness. "You're taking advantage of me," she said, her voice trembling but still clinging to a shred of defiance. Peter raised an eyebrow, a faint smile flickering across his lips, devoid of warmth. "Taking advantage?" he repeated, his tone even but laden with meaning. "I'm giving you a way out. If you have any other way to survive James Langston, feel free to walk out of here right now." He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped over his chest, his gaze challenging her. Anna fell silent, her heart pounding. She knew he was right. She had no other option. James had trapped her in a snare with no escape, and Peter, as much as she hated to admit it, was her only lifeline. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from breaking. "Fine," she nodded, her voice catching as if strangled in her throat. "But this is just a deal." Nothing more. Peter didn't respond immediately. He looked at her, his deep eyes seeming to pierce through every thought in her mind, then gave a slight nod. "Good," he said, standing and walking to the liquor cabinet in the corner of the room, pouring a glass of red wine. "We'll marry within a week. I'll handle everything." Anna turned away, not wanting him to see the tears welling up in her eyes. She left the office, the sound of her high heels echoing in the empty hallway. But in her heart, a heavy feeling began to weigh her down. The feeling of someone who had just sold her freedom. Just 7 days later, the wedding took place. It wasn't an ordinary ceremony, but an extravagant event that sent the entire city into a buzz. Peter, with his power and wealth, turned the day into a flawless performance. The city's grandest hall was draped in white roses imported from France. Sparkling crystal chandeliers hung high, and hundreds of guests, from influential businessmen to famous stars, gathered in their most luxurious attire. Anna stood before the mirror in the dressing room, wearing a pristine white wedding gown she had designed long ago, a masterpiece with a delicate veil hugging her slender frame, adorned with tiny pearls that shimmered like dewdrops. She looked like a goddess stepping out of a myth, her softly curled hair cascading over her shoulders, her full red lips lightly accented. But as she gazed into the mirror, her eyes were cold, devoid of any spark of joy or happiness. This wasn't the wedding she had dreamed of. It was a transaction, a contract signed with tears and helplessness. As she entered the hall, the sound of violins rose gently, and hundreds of eyes turned to her. Peter stood at the end of the aisle, tall and elegant in a perfectly tailored black suit, his hair neatly combed back, his deep eyes fixed on her unwaveringly. He didn't smile, showing no trace of a joyful groom. Only the usual coldness and arrogance remained. Anna walked toward him, each step feeling like it carried 1,000 pounds, her hands gripping the bouquet of white roses so tightly her fingers turned pale. The priest recited the vows, his voice monotonous as if reading a legal document. "Peter Blackwood, do you take Anna Carter to be your lawful wife?" Peter answered immediately, his voice low and firm. "I do." When it was Anna's turn, she paused for a second, her lips pressed tight, then whispered, "I do." Applause erupted, but to her it was just meaningless noise. After the ceremony, they moved into Peter's mansion, a majestic palace perched atop a hill, with towering white walls, a sprawling garden, and large glass doors overlooking the city's dazzling lights. From the outside, it was a place anyone would dream of living in. Inside, to Anna, it was a gilded prison. Peter led her to a private room on the second floor, spacious with a king-size bed draped in white silk sheets, a wardrobe full of expensive dresses, and a large window facing the night sky. "This is your room," he said, his voice flat. "I'll be in the room at the end of the hall. If you need anything, call the housekeeper." He turned and left, offering no words of comfort, no gentle gesture. Anna stood there, still clutching the hem of her wedding gown, feeling as though she had just stepped into a gilded cage, beautiful but suffocating. The first few days passed in frigid silence. Peter left the house at dawn and returned late at night, leaving only traces of his presence through the faint scent of his woody cologne lingering in the air, or a suit jacket casually draped over the sofa. Anna lived like a shadow in the house, avoiding conversation with him, avoiding his gaze, silently counting the hours as they slipped by. But she couldn't deny that, no matter how much she hated him, she was safe. No more black cars parked outside, no more silent phone calls or threatening envelopes. James had vanished from her life, at least for now, and she knew it was thanks to Peter. But that safety came at a cost. She was no longer herself. Every night she sat by the window, gazing down at the city, whispering to herself, "This isn't my life. This is just a deal." One evening she crossed paths with Peter in the living room by chance. He was holding a glass of wine, his eyes sliding over her as if she were a decorative object in the house. "You should get used to this place," he said, his voice cold. "This is your home now." Anna pursed her lips, her hands clenching into fists. "This isn't my home," she replied, her voice firm. "This is a prison you built for me." Peter didn't react, merely taking a sip of wine, his eyes darkening. "Call it what you want," he said, "but you're my wife, and I'll keep you safe." He turned and walked away, leaving Anna standing there, her heart heavy with a mix of gratitude and resentment toward the man who had pulled her from one darkness only to trap her in another. Chapter 4. Anna plans her escape. Life in Peter Blackwood's mansion was a perfect paradox. Everything was beautiful and luxurious, yet so cold it made Anna feel as though she were being buried alive in a gilded tomb. The mansion perched atop a hill with towering white walls, a meticulously tended garden, and large glass windows overlooking the city's dazzling lights at night. The interior was a blend of glossy ebony wood, pristine white marble, and abstract paintings hung on the walls, all exuding Peter's wealth and power. But to Anna, this place wasn't a home. It was a prison adorned with expensive trappings, where she was confined by a man who never smiled, never spoke gently, and only issued orders in a low, cold voice. "Stay here. Don't cause trouble." The first days after the wedding passed in heavy silence. Peter left the house at dawn and returned late at night, leaving Anna alone in a space so vast that each of her footsteps echoed like a cry for help no one could hear. The housekeeper, Mrs. Helen, a stern middle-aged woman with silver hair tightly pinned up, was the only person she regularly encountered, but she performed her duties mechanically, cleaning, cooking, and disappearing into the spacious kitchen without a single unnecessary word. Anna lived like a shadow, wandering through endless hallways, sitting by her room's window, gazing down at the city, her arms wrapped tightly around her slender frame, as if seeking some warmth amidst the house's chill. Each time she accidentally crossed paths with Peter, he looked at her with sharp, emotionless eyes, as if she were a decorative piece he'd recently acquired for his collection. Anna felt as though she had traded one oppressor for another. James Langston, with his threats and lurking shadows, was at least a clear enemy. She knew what he wanted and could try to resist. But Peter was different. He had saved her from James, but the price was her freedom. He wasn't sweet, wasn't tender, and made no effort to make her feel like this was a real marriage. Every word he spoke was like a command. Every action carried a sense of possession, and every glance made her feel smaller. One evening, as she sat in the vast dining room at a table long enough for 20, but occupied only by her, Peter walked in, a glass of red wine in hand. "You should eat more," he said, his voice flat, his eyes fixed on the window rather than her. "I don't want people thinking I let my wife go hungry." Anna pursed her lips, her hand tightening around the fork. "I'm not your pet," she replied, her voice trembling with anger. Peter turned to her, his gaze darkening, but he said nothing, merely took a sip of wine and left, leaving her in suffocating silence. That night, lying on the king-size bed draped in white silk sheets, Anna stared at the ceiling, her eyes wide open in the darkness. She whispered to herself, "I can't live like this forever." The thought wasn't new, but this time, it burned stronger than ever, like a fire flaring up in her chest. She didn't want to be Peter's caged bird, didn't want to live a life controlled by men like him or James. She needed freedom. Freedom to breathe, to live, to be Anna Carter again, the talented designer with big dreams. Not Mrs. Blackwood, a strange name forced upon her. But she knew that to reclaim that freedom, she had to escape. From Peter, from this mansion, and from the shadow of James that could return at any moment. Her first plan began to take shape one rainy afternoon. Peter had left the house that morning as usual, and Mrs. Helen was busy downstairs. Anna sat in her room, flipping through an old handbag, one of the few things she'd brought from her previous life. Inside, she found a small envelope containing savings from her past design contracts. Not much, just a few $1,000s, but enough to start over somewhere else. She hid the envelope under her pillow, her heart pounding as she thought about what she was about to do. She didn't have much time. Peter could return at any moment, and she knew he wasn't someone easily fooled. But she couldn't wait any longer. She had to act. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Anna set her plan in motion. She wore a simple black hoodie to conceal her striking appearance, tied her hair into a small bun, and tucked the envelope of money into her pants pocket. She looked around the room one last time, the lavish bed, the expensive dresses in the wardrobe, the large window overlooking the city, and whispered, "Goodbye." She opened the door, stepping into the dark hallway, her bare feet gliding softly over the marble floor to avoid making noise. Her heart raced, each tick of the clock in her mind sounding like a warning. She knew the mansion had security cameras, but she'd observed carefully. There was an escape route through the back kitchen door, where the camera was obscured by overgrown ivy. As she reached the ground floor, the house's cold air enveloped her. She heard Mrs. Helen's faint snoring from the small room near the kitchen, a sign the housekeeper was fast asleep. Anna tiptoed through the hallway, her hand gripping the kitchen doorknob tightly, and pushed it open. The scent of Peter's woody cologne lingered faintly, making her pause for a second, but she quickly shook her head, dispelling her fear. She stepped outside, the cool night air flooding her lungs, carrying the taste of the freedom she craved. The back door led to a narrow path winding through the garden, where she could climb over a low wall to escape. She had no clear plan, only that she'd take a night bus to some small town and start anew. Anna climbed the wall, her hands grasping dry branches, her feet scratched by sharp stones, but she didn't care. When she landed on the other side, she turned back for one last look at the mansion, a white structure glowing under the moonlight, beautiful yet cold like its owner. She smiled faintly, whispering, "I did it." Then she turned and hurried into the darkness, unaware that this first escape attempt was just the beginning of a series of failures she couldn't yet foresee. In her heart, the flame of freedom still burned, but she didn't expect that Peter, the man she just fled, would always find a way to track her down, like a shadow that never let go. Chapter 5. Peter always finds her. After climbing over the mansion wall in the rainy night, Anna felt a fleeting taste of freedom. The cold night air mixed with the scent of wet earth made her heart beat faster, not from fear but from hope. She had done it, escaped Peter Blackwood's gilded prison, if only temporarily. With a few $1,000s in her pocket and a vague plan in her mind, she plunged into the darkness, determined to vanish from his life forever. But she didn't know that Peter, the man she saw as her captor, was not someone who would let her go easily. He had his own way of keeping her, like a hunter who always finds his prey, no matter how far it runs. Her first escape began right after she left the mansion. Anna walked through winding, narrow streets, avoiding streetlights to stay unnoticed, her feet scratched by sharp stones, but she paid no mind. She caught a night bus, huddling in the back seat, clutching her bag like a talisman. After more than an hour, she got off in a small town a few dozen kilometers from the city, where the dim neon glow of a cheap motel flickered in the dark. She stepped up to the reception desk, her voice trembling as she requested a room. "Just one night. I'll pay cash." The receptionist, an old woman with tired eyes, handed her the key to room 204 without asking anything further. Anna breathed a sigh of relief, feeling as though she had one foot in freedom. She climbed the creaky wooden stairs, her footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. When she opened the door to room 204, the musty smell of old carpet hit her nose, but to her it was the scent of liberation. The tiny room with its single bed covered in a gray blanket and a dim table lamp was a place where she could rest before planning her next move. She closed the door, locked it tight, and sat on the bed, her trembling hands opening her bag to grab a water bottle. But then as she looked up, her heart seemed to stop. Peter was sitting there in the worn armchair in the corner, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand, his sharp, cold gaze piercing straight through her. He wore a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, his black suit jacket draped loosely over the chair's back, as if he had been there for a while, waiting for her to step into her own trap. "You thought I wouldn't know," he said, his voice low and even, but laced with unmistakable mockery. Anna sprang up, backing away until her back hit the door, her eyes wide with terror. How did you find me?" she stammered, her hand gripping the doorknob as if to flee immediately. Peter stood, stepping closer, each footfall on the wooden floor like a countdown. "You're my wife," he said, his voice cold but certain. "I know everything about you, every step, every thought." He stopped in front of her, tall and overpowering, his eyes darkening like a storm about to break. Anna turned, yanking the door open to run, but two men in black, Peter's bodyguards, were already standing in the hallway, blocking her path. She was taken back to the mansion, her heart heavy with the sting of her first failure. But Anna didn't give up. Her second escape came a few days later, after she regained some composure to plan more carefully. She knew she couldn't stay near the city. Peter had too many eyes here. She secretly took more money from a small safe in her room, a wedding gift from a guest Peter hadn't noticed, and booked a flight online to a distant city using the library computer in the mansion while he was away. That night she pretended to sleep early, waiting until the sound of Mrs. Helen's footsteps faded behind her door. She dressed in a discreet coat, pulled a baseball cap over her face, and slipped out through the back door again, more cautious this time to avoid making noise. At the airport, Anna's heart pounded as she queued through security. Every announcement over the loudspeaker, every glance from a staff member made her flinch, but she told herself, "Just get on the plane, and I'll be free." She gripped her ticket tightly, passing through security with a forced smile for the agent, then hurried toward the boarding gate. But as she stepped out of the checkpoint, a familiar figure appeared before her, tall and unmoving like a statue. Peter stood there in a long black coat, his eyes darkening under the airport lights, his penetrating stare chilling her to the bone. "Did you think you could escape me?" he asked, his voice low but sharp as a blade. Anna stepped back, her legs trembling, her hand crumpling the ticket in her grip. "Why?" she shouted, her voice breaking in a mix of anger and fear. "Why won't you let me go?" Peter advanced, his gaze never leaving her, but this time there was a flicker of something different. Not the usual arrogance, but a hidden pain she didn't notice. He didn't answer, only gestured to the two bodyguards behind her. They took her arms gently but firmly, leading her to a waiting car outside the airport. Anna struggled, screaming in vain, but her voice was drowned out by the airport's clamor. She was brought back to the mansion once more, the feeling of freedom dissolving like foam on water. When the car stopped at the mansion gates, Anna had no strength left to resist. She stepped out, her eyes red, tears streaming down her cheeks. She collapsed onto the steps, hands covering her face, sobbing, "Why won't you let me go? I don't want to live like this." Peter stood a few steps away, watching her in silence. His eyes darkened, his hand clenching into a fist in his coat pocket. He wanted to say something, to explain that he couldn't let her go, not just because of his promise to protect her from James, but because of something deeper he didn't dare admit. But he didn't speak. He turned and walked into the house, leaving Anna there, alone in the cold night, her heart shattered by despair. In Peter's heart, a sharp pain surged that he couldn't name. He went to his room, shut the door, and leaned against the wall, his hand gripping the wine glass so tightly it nearly shattered. He didn't want her to cry, didn't want her to see him as an enemy, but he didn't know any other way to keep her safe and to keep her by his side. He whispered to himself, "You don't understand, Anna." But he couldn't say it aloud, and the distance between them, though they were under the same roof, remained as vast as two separate worlds. Chapter 6. The First Stirring. In the days following her two failed escape attempts, Anna fell into a strange state of numbness. She no longer tried to run, not because she had given up, but because she was exhausted, both physically and mentally. Peter's mansion remained a gilded prison, but now it carried an additional layer of meaning. Safety. James Langston, though no longer appearing in person, lingered as a haunting shadow in her mind, and she knew that the moment she slipped beyond Peter's control, he would find her. But that safety didn't ease her. It only made her feel more like a bird trapped in a cage, protected, yet not free. She lived quietly in her spacious room, avoiding Peter as much as possible, but each time their eyes met by chance in the hallway or dining room, an indescribable feeling crept into her heart. Not quite hatred, but a confusion she didn't want to acknowledge. One night, as the sky outside was blanketed with dark clouds and not a single star shone, Anna sat alone in the mansion's living room. Peter had left that afternoon to handle an urgent meeting, and Mrs. Helen, the housekeeper, had retired to her room early. She wore a thin sweater, cradling a cup of hot tea, her unfocused gaze fixed on the crackling fireplace. The popping of the firewood was the only sound in the still space, until a faint noise, like breaking glass, came from the back door. Anna flinched, nearly dropping her tea. She stood, her heart pounding, and stepped toward the window to peer outside. But before she could pull the curtain, the living room door burst open, and two figures in black stormed in, their faces hidden behind masks, their eyes cold as blades. Anna screamed, retreating until her back hit the wall, her trembling hands groping for anything to defend herself with. One of the two, the taller one, with hands as large as vices, advanced, a muffled, deep voice sounding from behind the mask. "James sends his regards. He says you should behave." He drew a dagger, its steel blade glinting under the firelight. Panic seized Anna, her eyes darting around for an escape. But the two men had blocked every route. She screamed again, her voice breaking in terror. "Help me!" But she knew no one could hear. She was alone, and James had finally made his move. Just as the man raised the dagger to strike, a loud noise erupted from the front door. Peter charged in, his long black coat billowing, his eyes dark as a storm. Without hesitation, he lunged at the man with the knife, shoving Anna out of the blade's path in an instant. She fell to the floor, her mind reeling, but when she looked up, she saw Peter had dodged to the side, blood streaming from his left shoulder. The two men in black turned and fled. The room fell silent, save for Anna's ragged breathing and Peter's faint groans. She rushed to his side, her trembling hands helping him sit up. Blood from his shoulder soaked through his white shirt, pooling onto the wooden floor. "Peter!" she cried, her voice breaking in panic. He looked up, his eyes clouded with pain, but he managed a faint smile. "I'm fine. It's just a minor wound." "Don't talk," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'll call an ambulance." But Peter grabbed her hand, stopping her, his voice weak. "No need. I'll handle it myself." Anna sat there, her hands stained with his blood, her heart pounding with fear and another feeling she couldn't name. She looked at the wound on his shoulder, at the dark red blood seeping through the makeshift bandage, and a question slipped from her lips. "Why did you do it?" Her voice quivered, a mix of confusion and pain. Peter turned to her, his gaze locking onto hers, deeper and more complex than ever. "Because you're my wife," he replied, his tone as cold as always, as if it were an obvious answer. But his eyes told a different story, a subtle tenderness, a worry he'd never admit aloud. Anna froze, her hands still clutching the fabric over his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body through the hot blood. She continued bandaging him, each movement clumsy but careful, as if he were something fragile she didn't want to hurt further. Every time her fingers brushed his skin, a jolt ran through her. Not the hatred of before, but something warm, strange, and unsettling. When she tied the final strip of cloth, she looked up, catching his eyes still fixed on her. Neither spoke, but in that moment, amid the metallic scent of blood and the crackling of the fire, an invisible thread seemed to form between them. Anna turned away, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, trying to chase away the growing feeling in her chest. This is just a deal, she told herself. He only did it for his reputation, for duty. But when she glanced back at Peter, the man who had just taken a knife for her, sitting there with a pale face yet eyes never leaving her, she couldn't deny that her heart had stirred for the first time. He stood slowly, wincing in pain, and walked out of the room without another word, leaving Anna there, her hands still stained with his blood, her mind swirling with emotions she wasn't ready to face. Chapter 7. The Second Attack. Peter seriously injured. A few weeks later, rain poured down like a waterfall in the dark alley hidden behind the city's bustling streets, where the sound of gunfire rang out and Peter Blackwood collapsed onto the wet ground in front of Anna, blood staining his white shirt red, his arms still clinging tightly to her to shield her. The attack came suddenly on their way back from an urgent meeting with Peter's lawyer, an effort to find a way to bring James Langston to justice for his crimes. After the first attack in the mansion, Peter had heightened her security. Bodyguards always stayed close. Cameras were installed throughout the house, and he rarely let her go out alone. But that day, they couldn't avoid leaving the mansion. As their car passed through a deserted area near the old industrial zone, 3 black vehicles abruptly blocked their path. The bodyguards tried to protect them, but a barrage of gunshots shattered the car's windows. Peter shouted at the driver, "Stop!" He pulled Anna out of the car, running into a nearby alley to seek cover, but the men in black caught up. A bullet aimed straight at Anna, and Peter lunged forward, pushing her to the ground, using his body as a shield. The bullet pierced his chest and he crumpled onto the soaked ground, blood spreading beneath the rain. Anna screamed in panic, her voice lost amid the rain. "Peter! No, you can't die! Wake up!" She knelt beside him on the wet ground, her trembling hands cradling his pale face, tears mixing with the rain falling like a desperate plea. The men in black, James's henchmen, silently retreated into the darkness after Peter's bodyguards returned fire, leaving her in a nightmare with no escape. But the distant wail of an ambulance siren cut through her despair, bringing a fragile glimmer of hope. Medics rushed in, pulling her away from Peter, placing him on a stretcher, and taking him to the hospital through the unrelenting rain. Anna followed, her dress soaked with water and blood, her red-rimmed eyes never leaving his form until the emergency room doors closed in front of her. Peter was rushed into surgery immediately, the bullet wound in his chest too severe to delay. Anna sat in the hospital hallway, her hands stained with his blood, her vacant eyes staring at the cold white door. The ticking of the clock stabbed at her heart, each second a fear that he wouldn't make it. She curled up on the chair, her hands clenched until they bled, tears falling silently. "I can't lose him," she whispered, her voice trembling. The image of Peter collapsing in the rain, blood pooling on the ground, haunted her. If he left, she wouldn't know how to go on. She regretted running from him, seeing him as a captor, only now realizing he was everything to her. "Please, Peter, don't leave me," she begged inwardly, terrified she'd never get to say sorry or tell him she loved him. The doctor emerged, his face weary but reassuring. "He's made it through the critical stage, but he'll need time to recover. You can visit him." Anna leapt up, her shaky legs carrying her into the recovery room. Seeing Peter motionless, surrounded by IV lines and machines, she took his hand and cried, "Don't scare me like that again." The fear of losing him lingered, but now she resolved to stay, never leaving his side. He looked weaker than ever, his sharp features now pale, his eyes shut tight, his breathing steady through an oxygen mask. Anna sat by his bedside, her hand instinctively grasping his cold one. She didn't leave, didn't return to the mansion, ignoring the nurse's advice to rest. She stayed day after day, caring for him for a full month without stepping away. She changed his bandages, wiped sweat from his brow with a warm cloth, and whispered encouragement she never thought she'd say to him. "You have to get better, Peter. You can't give up." Each time she saw the wound on his chest, where the bullet had pierced to protect her, she felt a sharp pain, not from the blood or James's cruelty, but from the thought that she could have lost him forever. Throughout that month, Anna lived like a shadow in the hospital. She dozed off on the hard chair by his bed, ate hasty meals from the cafeteria, and refused every suggestion from Mrs. Helen or Peter's assistant that she go home to rest. She couldn't leave, not out of duty, but because of a deep feeling she didn't dare name. Whenever he groaned in delirium, she held his hand tightly, stroking his slender fingers to soothe him. Whenever the nurses changed his bandages and she saw the vivid red scar on his chest, she recalled the moment he fell in the rain, whispering, "Stay behind me." She wondered why he did it, why he'd risk his life for her. Someone who had fled him, who had seen him as an enemy. On the 30th day, as the first spring sunlight slipped through the hospital window blinds, Peter woke. His eyes opened slowly, hazy and weak. But when he saw Anna beside him, a spark flared in his gaze. Anna started, tears spilling before she could hold them back. "Peter!" she exclaimed, her voice choked, gripping his hand as if afraid he'd vanish. He tried to smile, but his face twisted in pain. "You here?" he asked, his voice hoarse, faint as a breath. Anna nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, falling onto his hand. "I've been here for a month," she whispered. "I couldn't leave." Peter looked at her, his deep eyes seeming to want to say something, but he was too weak to speak. Anna leaned down, pressing her forehead to his hand, sobbing, "This time, it's my turn to protect you." Her voice trembled but was firm, like a promise she'd made to herself. She didn't know when it happened, but the thought of leaving him, as she once craved, had become unimaginable. She recalled the times he'd saved her just in time, from the knife in the mansion to the bullet in the rainy alley, each time putting her above his own life. For the first time, she didn't see him as a controller, but as a man who had sacrificed everything to keep her safe. In the days that followed, Anna stayed by his side as he slowly recovered. She helped him sit up, fed him spoonfuls of warm porridge she cooked in the hospital's small kitchen, and read him books, romantic novels she found in the waiting room, though she knew he'd never admit he liked them. Peter regained strength, his voice growing clearer, but he spoke little, only watching her silently with eyes she couldn't fully decipher. Once as she adjusted his shirt, her hand brushed his chest where the scar remained red. He caught her hand, holding it for a moment, and whispered, "Thank you." Anna looked up, meeting his gaze, no longer cold or arrogant, but a tenderness she'd never seen before. In that moment, Anna knew her heart had changed. She no longer wanted to run, not because she feared James, but because she couldn't imagine a life without Peter by her side. She sat beside him, still holding his hand, and for the first time in all the months in his mansion, she felt this was no longer a deal, but something real, deeper. She wiped her tears, smiling faintly at him. "You have to fully recover. I have so much to tell you." Peter didn't reply, only squeezed her hand gently. But his eyes said it all, that he didn't want her to leave either. She stayed not because she was forced, but because she chose to. And in that cold hospital room, amid the smell of antiseptic and the steady hum of machines, an invisible bond tied them together, stronger than any contract ever could. Chapter 8. A True Proposal. Peter Blackwood gradually recovered after his days in the hospital, the scar on his chest still red, but strength returning to his every movement. Anna stayed by his side throughout that time, and when he was well enough to leave the hospital, she no longer felt the hilltop mansion was a prison. It remained vast, still cold in its long marble corridors, but now every corner bore the traces of the days she cared for him. The books she read to him stacked on the shelf, the warm scent of porridge wafting from the kitchen, and the gentle look in his eyes whenever she entered the room. They didn't speak much about what had changed, but both could feel it. The bond between them was no longer a contract, but something deeper, more genuine. One early spring evening, as the sunset bathed the city below the mansion in gold, Peter called Anna to the garden. She stepped out, wearing a simple jade silk dress, not the lavish wedding gown of before, but still making her look like a goddess in the fading sunlight. Peter stood there, in a minimalist yet elegant gray suit, his jet black hair neatly combed back, his deep eyes fixed on her unwaveringly. Before him was a small, exquisitely set table, flickering candlelight from white candles in glass holders, red roses arranged in a heart shape around it, and two glasses of wine shimmering with ruby light. A soft violin melody played from a small speaker hidden somewhere in the garden, creating a private, warm atmosphere, utterly unlike the cold extravagance of their first wedding. Anna was surprised, her eyes widening as she approached. "What's this, Peter?" she asked, her voice gentle but unable to hide her curiosity. He smiled, a rare smile, not arrogant, not cold, but tender enough to make her heart flutter. "Sit down," he said, pulling out a chair for her. Anna sat, her hand instinctively brushing the table's edge, feeling the warmth of the candlelight spread through her fingertips. Peter sat across from her, his gaze locked on her, as if she were the only thing in his world at that moment. They ate dinner in silence, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of before. It was the comfort of two people who had walked through darkness to find each other. The appetizer was warm pumpkin soup, followed by tender beefsteak with wine sauce, and finally a chocolate mousse that melted in the mouth, which he knew she loved. As the meal neared its end, Peter stood and walked to her side. Anna looked up, her breath catching as he knelt on one knee before her, pulling a small dark blue velvet box from his pocket. He opened it, revealing a simple yet refined platinum ring, set with a small diamond that sparkled under the candlelight. She froze, her hands covering her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Peter looked straight into her eyes, his voice low and warm, free of the arrogance of days past. "The first time we married, it was a contract. I forced you, and I knew you never truly wanted to be with me. But now, everything's different." He paused, taking a deep breath, his eyes softening as never before. "Anna, I never wanted to force you, not at the beginning, nor when you stayed with me under that contract. I know you thought I was controlling you, but the truth is, I couldn't let you go. Every time you ran, I held you back not because I wanted to own you, but because I knew if you left my arms, James would never spare you. I've seen how dangerous he is, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." He took her hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they touched her skin, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I took that knife for you, fell in that rainy alley, not for honor or duty. I did it because I love you, Anna. I've loved you since the first time I saw you at that fashion event, when you rejected me with that proud look I could never forget. I loved you through every escape, through the days you stayed by my side in the hospital, and now I just want to ask you again, not as someone forcing you, but as someone begging you to stay." He held up the ring, his eyes shining with hope. "This time, it's not a contract. No more forcing, no more deals. Anna, will you stay with me forever?" Anna felt her heart stop. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from pain, but from an unexpected happiness she never thought she'd feel with him. His words echoed in her mind, each one breaking down the walls she'd built around her heart. She remembered it all, the days she fled from him, the times he found her, the moments he shielded her with his own life. He had collapsed in that rainy alley, blood pouring to protect her, and he had woken in the hospital where she stayed by him for a month. She looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity, the fear of losing her, and the love he'd kept hidden so long. And for the first time, she didn't want to run anymore. She stood, her trembling hands touching his shoulders, then knelt before him so they were level. "Peter," she whispered, her voice choked, "I've run from you too many times, but every time you found me. I used to think it was control, but now I understand. You did it because you love me, and I realize I don't want to run anymore. I want to stay." She hugged him, her arms wrapping tightly around his neck, tears soaking into his shoulder. Peter hugged her back, his breath warm against her hair, tender and gentle. He gently pulled away, took the ring, and slipped it onto her ring finger, his touch grazing her skin like a silent promise. "So you'll say yes?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Anna nodded, smiling through her tears. "Yes, forever." They stood, hand in hand, under the flickering candlelight and the faint violin notes. Peter pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead, then her lips. A kiss soft but profound, no longer about control or possession, but the genuine love of a man who had found the most precious thing in his life. Anna kissed him back, her hands gripping his shirt, feeling his warmth spread through her fingertips. When they parted, she rested her head on his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat, the heart that had nearly stopped for her in that rainy alley. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. Peter tightened his hold, his voice low and warm. "Thank you for staying." From that moment, they began anew. No more contracts, no more coercion, only a true love born from the scars and pain they'd overcome together. In the days that followed, the mansion ceased to be a gilded prison. Anna brought her sketches there, turning a corner of a room into a small studio, and Peter often sat beside her, quietly watching her work with tender eyes. They ate dinners in the garden together, walked under the moonlight together, and built a life neither had dared dream of when they first met. James Langston, with all his danger, faded into the past. Peter used his influence to bring him to justice, and with the lawyer's help, James was arrested for his crimes. But to Anna and Peter, that no longer mattered. They had found each other not through escapes or pursuits, but through the moments they chose to stay. One evening, as they stood on the mansion's balcony overlooking the brightly lit city, Anna leaned against his shoulder, whispering, "I once thought you were my captor. Now I know you're the one who set me free." Peter smiled, kissing her hair. "And you're the one who saved my heart." The marriage that began with coercion had become a true love story, complete and enduring, like the ring on Anna's finger, simple yet eternal. They were no longer two strangers bound by circumstance, but two souls who had found each other in the darkness and stepped together into the light. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.